Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates, a very warm welcome to you this morning to today's special session on innovations and partnerships for the future we want, the role of the private sector. It's my pleasure to now invite Ms. Nanda Krairat, Director of ESCAP Social Development Division, to say a few words on the purpose of today's session.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, an ambitious new Sustainable Development Agenda is in the making for the post-2015 era. And for it to succeed, action will be required by all sectors of society, government, civil society, and the private sector. The purpose of our session today is to gain deeper insight into the role of the private sector, particularly in the context of shared accountability in building the future we want. All across the world, we see increased engagement by the private sector, not only because of business opportunities, but also of commitment to improving people's lives. Business is increasingly forming alliances to address the world's most urgent development issues, and some of these initiatives have reached significant scale in areas such as water, gender equality, and climate change. How can we leverage and scale up these innovative partnerships, particularly in Asia Pacific? How can we instill sustainable development principles and greater accountability into business practices? And how can we make corporate sustainability a transformative force in achieving a shared, secure, and sustainable development world? Ladies and gentlemen, in the next few hours, these and other questions will be explored and debated by our very distinguished panel. We hope you will enjoy the program. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Krairat. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have a very distinguished panel of leaders from the business and philanthropic sectors here with us today. They will share their insights and perspectives. To moderate the session, I'm pleased to introduce Ms. GWEN Robinson. GWEN is a Senior Asia Editor at Nikkei Asia Review and Senior Fellow at the Institute of Security and International Studies at Chulalongkorn University in Thailand. She is no stranger to the region, having covered various global finance and business issues for the Financial Times in the region, as well as in America and Europe since 1995. GWEN, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to first just outline briefly. I will introduce our panellists, and we will then have some general questions and open the floor to interactive discussion with the delegates after some questions. So first, allow me to introduce to my far left Chandran Nair, founder and chief executive of the Global Institute for Tomorrow. Chandran advocates for a more sustainable approach to development in Asia and has helped governments and corporations instill these principles into their key decision-making processes. His book, Consumptionomics, was named as one of the Globalist top 10 books of 2011, and he has some very strong and interesting views, which we look forward to hearing today. And next to Chandran is Andrew MUIRHEAD, the Executive Vice Chairman of the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network. And Andrew, through the AVPN, promotes the development of practitioner-oriented resources to help scale the practice of venture philanthropy across Asia, and also has a lot of insight into the other side, so to speak, through a previous career in banking, amongst other things. And then we have Kun Kobkan Watanavarakun, who is chairperson of Toshiba Thailand, and more than that, one of the best-known business women and business executives in Thailand. As a recipient of the Leading Women Entrepreneurs of the World Award, Kun Kobkan, pardon me, Kun Kobkan has pushed corporate social responsibility and helped promotion of arts and educational projects in Thailand and abroad. And she also happens to be our one real business, private sector representative who can give us some insights into how companies are thinking these days in this region. And finally, ASHVIN DAYAL, who is the Associate Vice President, Managing Director Asia of the Rockefeller Foundation. ASHVIN heads the Rockefeller Foundation's pioneering initiatives on issues such as addressing climate change and providing renewable energy solutions in Asia. He's based in Bangkok but has a broad regional view. So we look forward to some interesting comments from you all. And to kick off the discussion, I could perhaps start with saying that we have broadly moved a long way in the last years from general discussion about involving the corporate sector in philanthropic measures. We've moved through to the rise of impact investing and the issues, debates such as corporate reconciling the profit motive with the philanthropic motive. And now we're looking at how we can evolve this model and really get some private and public sector cooperation in advancing the post-2015 development agenda, which is now in the stages of finalisation. Very critical issue, and I'd like to ask our panellists, starting with ASHVIN, on how you see the issues going forward and how we can look at innovative and new ways to push the post-2015 development agenda. Over to you, ASHVIN.
Let me, there we go. Let me just maybe offer a few opening thoughts on this very important topic. You know, from a Rockefeller Foundation perspective, we've been working for, you know, on sort of complex problems for now over 100 years. And I think as we look at the world today and the sorts of challenges that we are trying to grapple with, and I think the same is happening through the Sustainable Development Goals process, you know, we're recognizing a couple of really big issues. One is, you know, we talk about complexity, and I think that may be sometimes an overused term, but when we think about what the different forces are out there that are shaping a problem or a challenge, it is becoming increasingly complex. And when we look at the scale of some of those challenges, again, you know, we recognize that no one sector can really tackle this on its own. The role of government is central, and I don't think this discussion should become a sort of a distraction from the importance of leadership within the sort of policy arena. But when we look at specific issues, we recognize as a foundation that there's an increasing role in which multiple stakeholders, and especially our focus today on the private sector, become really vital to trying to address these challenges. And I'll give you two examples that are sort of close to home in terms of the work we do. We've been working for the last 5 years on trying to grapple with the question of climate change, particularly looking at how cities are coping with the risks and challenges. I think all of us who live and work in Asia have seen how cities are increasingly vulnerable because of new sort of shocks and stresses associated with climate change. But when you think about cities and what drives change within a city, the notion that you can really transform how cities are prepared for that future, for this more uncertain future, without working in partnership with the private sector would be really a dead end, because ultimately, with the concentration of money and resources and assets and business activity in any city in Asia, it is really important to work with the private sector in trying to carve out a more common agenda. So, you know, it gets into very practical questions, you know, about land use and other things that the private sector really has to be at the center of that dialogue and discussion with government, with civil society. So there's much more of that emphasis on a multi-stakeholder approach, where everyone is seen as having a voice and something to actually offer and a compromise to make in terms of how we shape a future. The second example is more on tackling quite a specific problem. We're doing a lot more work now on renewable energy, and particularly access off-grid in Asia. There are, you know, something like 1.3 billion people around the world who lack access to electricity. And this is where we're actually needing to start thinking much more creatively, not about how do we do a small project here or there, but how do we build an enabling environment, a sort of ecosystem in which we can work with the implementation capacity that the private sector has, the entrepreneurial capability that the private sector has to solve these problems, to address access to energy, but to do it in a way that is socially beneficial, that is going to be equitable, and that is actually going to help contribute towards the kinds of development goals that we have, that we're setting out for ourselves. The last thought I'd leave you with, which is the challenge I think that we're facing, is how do we bring the accountability question into this discussion with the private sector? If we're setting out 17, I believe, new goals with 150 plus targets, how do we work with the private sector to actually integrate and understand those goals and targets so that we are not just having a situation where anyone can declare or self-declare that, yes, you know, I'm contributing to an SDG. How are we going to measure this? That task is going to get a lot more complex in this next phase as we think about more multi-stakeholder approaches. So I think there's a huge opportunity here. I think we need to do a lot more to get the private sector and even philanthropic organizations like myself to understand the Sustainable Development Goals and how they're going to be rolled out, what the implementation plan is for that, and how we can align around that in the future, which I think is something that's going to be essential. So I'll stop there with just those first thoughts on the kinds of ways in which we see the importance of working with the private sector, and hand back to you, Gwen.
Thank you very much, ASHVIN. Look forward to maybe you can enlighten us on how you're going to get the corporate sector to, the private sector to understand better, but we can come to that. Kun Kob Khan, perhaps you can give us your views.
Private sector around here. First of all, I think I'm here wearing 4 hats. The first hat is definitely Toshiba in Thailand. We exist for 45 years already. The second hat is I'm also with the Chamber of Commerce. The third hat is that I'm a member of Anti-Corruption Network in Thailand. Last but not least, the fourth hat, I'm a mother of 2 children. And I would like to talk from those 4 points of view. I think to think about the others for Toshiba in Thailand, our philosophy is to bring good things to life. It might sound like GE, but Toshiba Corporation in Japan, they said we commit to people, commit to the future. So I would say that in the past, some corporation and some company have been thinking a lot and doing a lot for the society and for the environment. But not everyone, we have to admit that. I can say that many other companies, especially maybe the smaller ones, they would think that wait until they get richer and then they will do something. There will be time that they will do and contribute to the others. But things have changed. Things have changed. Nowadays, private sectors, especially in Thailand, I would say that we realize the importance of this. Why? Why do we change? My company was flooded 3 years ago. 10 of Toshiba companies in Thailand were under 3-meter depth of water for 45 days. My industrial park also underwater. Together with many other, I think, uncountable factories and companies and houses underwater. We also face the difficulty nowadays to open factories. In the past, maybe people would like to welcome the new investment in their community, but it is no longer so. If you want to open a new factory anywhere, people will not allow. Things have changed. The picture of the private sectors have changed. We are now capitalists. We are now the one who maybe will bring in toxic waste to their community. We are the one only who would like to take. So therefore, on one side, in order to expand our business, to grow our business into the future, the private sectors have to change our image. But not only the image, it has to go deeper than that. We need to coexist with the world, with the country, and with the community. So what are we going to do, or what we are doing now? Now I'm talking about the Chamber of Commerce, maybe together with the Federation of Thai Industry and many other bankers association also. We believe in the teaching of His Majesty the King of Thailand, sufficiency economy, which is actually the same thing. That in order to grow with sustainability, the business must grow together with the community and environment. And I'm the head of the sufficiency economy of Chamber of Commerce. I have been doing this for, I think, the past 4 or 5 years already. And we are grooming up not only the old business, but also the young generation of the Chamber of Commerce to start a business in this way. So more and more of the private sectors will now, either they really believe in that, but they know that they have to do it. So we need to strike the balance, not only just to do our business and maximize our profit, but we need to learn how to share it with the people and with the environment. Another thing that we start to see in Thailand, I think the problem of the politics, it has come from the big gap between the rich and the less fortunate. And we now realize that in order to reduce that kind of gap, we cannot totally rely on the government. The private sector must do something in order to do the wealth distribution. We need to care more for SME. We need to care more for the people in order for us to live together peacefully. We also realize the importance of ethics. In the past, we think that corruption is something to do with government, something to do with the big guys. And we only criticize, we only wait for them to change. But now we know that it has to start from ourselves. And that is why anti-corruption network in Thailand has been established for, I think, almost 3 years already from the private sectors, from the collaboration with many private sectors companies, and trying to join hands with the governments and people to change. What we have done is not only to change ourselves and do what we can do, but we also try to reach out. Now, the Chamber of Commerce, we come up with the supply chain concept, meaning that if we have successfully done what we believe in, we should not only wait for the others to follow. So, for example, my company, as Toshiba, we are now not only taking care of ourselves, we also we are taking care of our supply chain, like our dealers, our suppliers, how to change them, how to teach them to care for their staff, to care for their communities, to take care of the environment, to plant trees, and to do the social activities. Another thing that we have been doing is that this is a big concept, but we know that the private sectors, we also have our limited strength. So therefore, the way we are doing is that we focus. We cannot change everything by ourselves. So each of us will select the route and the ways in order to make the project successful. For example, Chamber of Commerce, they have selected 7 areas in Thailand where they will develop not only the private companies, but also the whole supply chain. We select farmers, the rice. We select something to do with the fisheries and many others. Because we know that the rice pledge problem in Thailand it's something that if we only wait for the government to help them, they might come up with another rice pledge scheme, and that will not help anything. So therefore, we better do something. So very soon you will see I think the policies and also the responsibility of many private sectors in order to step out and help the farmers, in order for them to stand up on their feet, grow rice, make the value-added products, and then extend it to the others. What will be the benefit out of this? As I say, we have to do it, otherwise we cannot survive. But also, I have to say that this is maybe from the head of Toshiba company. When you care for people, this is a part of human resource development in my company. People nowadays, especially the young generation, they no longer stay with the company because of the salary and the welfare. A lot of people have misunderstood the young generation that they only care for their own private happiness. But it is, I think, the wrong perception. We started to have a direct communication with the younger generation, with the Chamber of Commerce around the country. We realized that actually the young generation, they want to have a sustainable future. Actually, they have learned from maybe the past mistake of their parents. So they want to work with the company who can help them to help the country, who can help them to help the world. So this is the future. This is coming. So I would end my speech by saying that the benefit is not only just for us to survive, and that is why we are, pushing more and more, but it is because it is the spirit that the people feel that it is important. This is a thing that money cannot buy. And this is a thing that will help us to realize that every individual can bring good things to life to all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kun Kop Kan. We will then proceed to Andrew, please. Let's hear from you.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Delighted to be here this morning. I'm a fairly recent newcomer to the region. I only moved here earlier this year, but already I recognise the remarkable potential and the remarkable opportunities that are here. I should say something perhaps briefly about AVPN before making some comments on the question itself. AVPN, the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network, has its origins in groups of people looking for more rational resourcing of social purpose organisations, or a more rational use of philanthropic resource and greater levels of transparency and accountability. That is the genesis. But very quickly, AVPN is 2.5 years old currently, based in Singapore, but with members, 166 members across the region in 20-odd countries. But very early, it became absolutely, abundantly clear that this is an all-sector world that we live in, that it is about the social sector, the business sector, and the government sector working together towards major solutions to challenging problems. So the platform that AVPN is about bringing those three sectors together and bringing all of the actors together to try and deploy resources more effectively. There is something also in the DNA of AVPN. That's far too many acronyms, I apologise. But there's something in the DNA about the demand side for resource and the way in which the funding world does not always act in a supportive and helpful way to that. And I think of the short-termism and fragmentation that surrounds resource. So the venture philanthropy movement is about how do we give longer-term time frames to social purpose organisations, and how do we reduce the fragmentation of resource that can sometimes surround social organisations. And the outcomes of those two things are actually distressing. In 20 years of deploying philanthropic resource, I became ever more concerned and saddened by the way in which incredible social entrepreneurs, people with real ability to change lives and do remarkable things, were spending 30% of their time doing those things and 70% staying afloat and keeping the money rolling in and accounting for the money in multiple ways to multiple places. So this coming together and collaboration has got so many angles to it, and we seek to be something of an intersection for our various members and fostering collaboration towards long term. Looking to the future and challenges, I think that there's the language surrounding social investment and impact investing and venture philanthropy can be a minefield and can be slightly complex. So I think there's a call for a simplification in what we do, and we're looking for commonalities of approach. I think that there's a common methodology that applies to all of the types of money being delivered to social sector or to social outcome organisations. And the 6 steps that we see that apply to impact investing members, to philanthropic members, is for the grant giving or the support giving sector to really understand the social issue. First thing, to understand the social issue that it seeks to make the change to. I think in the past there has been too many people moving to the answer before properly understanding and defining the starting point. I think also careful and proportionate due diligence is the second element that we see in our members and our members aim towards. I think also realism and on timescales and giving time frames that are consistent with the recipient organisation. I think one of the things, prior to joining AVPN, I set up a series of venture philanthropy funds, and one of the things that drove that was a need to provide funding and support and resource that matched the time frame of the recipient organisation. If you make a commercial investment, it's the business plan of the recipient organisation that is what drives the time frame. But in a social setting, so much of the resource is driven by the giver, the procurer, and so on. So I think timing or proper time frames are important. I think the fourth element of a venture philanthropy methodology is about the core of the organisations you're working with, and not simply funding programmes. It's about funding the capacity development, people to build the resilience of the organisation. I think also not forgetting the logic model at the heart and the outcomes, and having a learning evaluation framework around all of the work that a funder is engaged in. And the sixth stage and final stage would be towards open reporting of what's been provided. So if those are the tenets in which the supply side are based on, the next challenge and the next issue that I see and we intend to tackle, or we started to tackle, is getting the language the same on both sides. It's all very well for supply side to be talking in a particular way, but I think unless we have those seeking resource understanding and fitting into that. So we're in the process currently of launching a knowledge centre, and a huge part of the responsibility of that knowledge centre will be to try and work to build a commonality of language across supply and demand. But we're here to talk about business and business engagement, and I mentioned earlier the tri-sector, the three-sector importance. And the business sector brings enormous things to the partnerships that we see across the region. It brings human capital, it brings models, but the human capital is one that probably brought me to Asia. I came in 2013 to speak at the AVPN conference, and I was blown away by the human capital, the 400 people in that room, the educational attainment, the energy, the drive, and they were young and dynamic. And I think that we've got an enormous generation or generations coming through of ability and remarkable attitude and orientation. I think when I look at my generation and what we've done to the world, I think we're very lucky in the generation that's coming through. And many of those in corporate settings looking for footprint beyond corporate world. So I think that's a huge resource for us. We see CSR evolving, and I won't say any more because that's been covered already. And we see various different types of capital. People using endowments rather than income and endowments, social investment, social impact bonds, and impact investing. So I think there's a hugely exciting time. There's lots of worlds colliding, and I think the future is bright. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And finally, Chandran, perhaps you could give a few thoughts.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to make a couple of qualifications. The first is that I spent 20 years in the private sector, and my organization, although it's a think tank, is actually run as a company, as a private enterprise, rather than as one that's recipient of funding. So I just want to make that very clear as well. The second thing is to say that I may say a few things that will make me slightly unpopular, but I hope some of you will join me for lunch. So thank you very much. I don't want to be sitting alone. The things that I don't believe in is that philanthropy will save the world, or that investment banks donating a lot of money will be all done in good gesture and with goodwill at heart. I think this is slightly nonsensical, and we need to tackle this sort of narrative. In terms of the subject today about public-private partnerships, I think we have to be very careful and understand that there's an inherent tension between the public and the private sector. The public good is not essentially the core activity of the private sector, and that we should be very intellectually honest and accept. That doesn't make the private sector, bad, evil people, etc., though some are more evil than the others, but, we'll not go there. But the point is that there is a tension, and this is our challenge, clearly. Now, I would like to make my comments by picking up on the last image that we had on the slide, which was the future we want. And that, I think, is a very interesting statement, because I think it's not necessarily clear what is the future we need or desire, and it's quite different from the future we will get. But clearly, the trajectory that we in this part of the world, and I can't talk about the rest of the world, but I hope you will make some connections, the trajectory of the world that we live in this part of the world is one that can be crudely put as the future we want is to ape the West. We all want to live Western lifestyles, etc. And unless you have your head in the sand, this will be a catastrophic outcome. In 2050, this part of the world will have something like 5-6 billion people. And the suggestion that we will have a future without confronting the reality that 5-6 billion Asians cannot and should not aspire to live like Westerners is absolute denial. This is not possible. Therefore, the question then is, well, what will our future look like? If you look at the evidence today, the future doesn't look too good. And this is not me being very pessimistic, but a future based on, all Asians having cars, etc., lawnmowers and barbecue pits and swimming pools, is against the laws of science, entropy, thermodynamics, and physics. Okay? So this is not possible. So then we morph into picking nice words. We'll have the green economy, which is kind of fiction. Green cars, Star Wars. In fact, Star Trek plus. These are not possibilities, but we are clutching at straws because we all want to have a solution that makes us all feel good when we leave this room. And then we can go back into denial. So my question is simply this for this discussion is, well, what will Asia look like and what will we have? If this is the most constrained part of the planet in terms of population and therefore pressures on the resource base, then fundamentally the question is, how do we organize ourselves, both economically and politically? And therein lies the most difficult questions. The suggestion that the rich world will somehow be benevolent and trade its rights for a more equitable world is also being very naive. This will not happen. So I would like to suggest that the question of private-public partnership needs to be a much deeper discussion about how we shape our economic models, and fundamentally the one that we are very reluctant to talk about, which is our political agendas as well. This is fundamentally a political issue. So I would basically talk about three core ideas in terms of the solutions and then the details. But, you know, not being a genius, I don't have all the answers. But this is to suggest that unless we ask the right questions and put the policy frameworks in place, there is very little scope for public-private partnerships. And we are left with sort of very superficial discussions. The first one, in terms of public-private partnerships, is therefore discussing the tension of how do we put economic growth subservient to essentially the core issue of maintaining the vitality of natural resources. And this should not be left to environmental ministers and departments, etc., because as soon as you do that, you have outsourced it to the weakest element in the government. I've never met an environmental minister, a sustainability minister person, or a CSR person who has any power in anything. Okay, so you have to make it at the center of economic policy making. How do you make it subservient? And that is a much more discussion about economics. The second is, of course, the issue, political issue, of putting collective welfare ahead of individual rights. And the idea that, you know, as I said, we need more cars in Asian cities like I need a hole in my head. Yet we're being told that the automotive industry will be the engine of growth. Well, we can't. And I won't go into the numbers about how many cars we will have in Asia if we all even have half car ownership levels taken for granted in the OECD countries, basically catastrophic. So who's going to tell people they can't have cars? Policies, tough, draconian policies. This will, of course, put collective interests ahead of individual rights. But try telling people in the United States they can't have cars, and when I've done this in the United States, they think I'm undercover Taliban. That I don't understand rights and things like that, you know, that I must be slightly misguided. So you have to put collective welfare ahead of individual rights. There is an opportunity in this part of the world because there are certain traditions that put collective rather than individuals. And I think the Japanese, for me, exemplify that more so than anybody else. The Koreans do a bit, etc. So that becomes, but putting collective welfare ahead of individual rights flies in the face of the Western liberal narrative that you can all be free, democratic, capitalists, and technology will solve all the problems. And this is a huge ideological tension which defines the world we live in. Very uncomfortable. And many platforms that we all engage in to discuss these issues are not bold enough to go there. And my third point is we need to reprice resources, which is both an economic and political discussion. And I can go on about it, but if you just look at the issue of climate change, which we all want to talk about at the moment, where climate change is here, the question is how bad is it going to be, and who is going to suffer, and whether you can protect yourself in your air-conditioned balloon because you can afford it. But climate change is here. The question of CO2 is purely an issue of pricing. And what do we have around the world? A great unwillingness to price. So our economic model is based on two things. Essentially promoting relentless consumption, buy things you don't need with money you don't have, debt. And if you're middle class, of course, to impress people you don't like, but that's a slight privilege that some of us have, not all of us. So buy things you don't need with money you have, which is the economic model of consumption-led growth. And secondly, of course, to do that, you need to relentlessly underprice everything. So let me give you an example. The forest fires in Kalimantan. We all go, oh my God, an environmental catastrophe. Every 12 months it returns. And nobody wants to accept that you and me, the consumer, is the culprit. That we want our cheap cookies. We want shampoos, 5 different versions. Next week at last year's prices when all the resource inputs are increasing. And we'll turn a blind eye because we do not want to accept the fact that our consumption model, which is then, I've got how many minutes more? 2? Okay. Our consumption model is premised on someone making sure you have your shampoo at last year's prices and getting it even cheaper. And this is not just in Asia, so the forest will continue to burn. So if you continue to underprice the resource base on an economic model that thrives on promoting relentless consumption because you have a right to consume everything, then you have to do something else. You have to constantly externalize the cost of goods. I'll give you one example. What is the price of an iPad here in Bangkok these days? About $500-600 US. I would hazard a guess that the true price of an iPad is about $5,000 US, and I know that no business school will try and prove me wrong because it's premised on how the geniuses can make everything cheaper. And the iPad is not made in California, but instead made in China because it has to be underpriced. And the externalities left in China, and then we blame the Chinese for polluting the world, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to reprice resources and fundamentally question the economic model of how we define productivity, which is a larger discussion about productivity today is based on an age-old, 200-year-old Western economic theory that if you have a lot of stuff and you want to create greater economic wealth, then you have to improve and hasten the way in which you use those resources. We have a very different problem in Asia. We have a lot of people, limited amount of resources. What do we need to do? Use those resources very carefully and putting as much people to work as possible, not replacing them with robots, perhaps except in Japan. Where it's okay. We even have now robots making robots, which is kind of cool, you know. But I'll finish off by saying that the point about financial profits is also something we have to question very well. The financial economic measures of profitability today are based on essentially externalizing costs. My last point I was trying to make about philanthropy, and it's important, we all need to help. But the suggestion that there are rich and famous people who will come to our rescue and will always be there is unsustainable. And we have to be very careful, particularly I noticed that in this forum for the last 2 days, you've been talking about accountability as well. And accountability, as I understand it, accountability for the Millennium Development Goals, etc. But I think UN organizations and governments should be very, very careful about where they take money from. They should be very, very accountable for the legitimacy and the legitimacy of those funds. I won't mention it, but I noticed that there's a large investment bank that was mentioned as one of the examples of great philanthropic work. I would hazard a guess that most people don't believe that bank. That bank has a terrible reputation, and we should be very careful again about those things. So we are quite often quite intellectually lazy, on one hand calling for certain things, but on the other hand accepting certain dogmas and not questioning them. My last point would be that these issues cannot be solved by calling on people to be good, or thinking that companies will be good, or government people. They can't be. They will be only done because we are determined to put in place the right policies. My plea to policymakers here is that please do not be seduced by the notion that public-private partnerships will allow you to abdicate your role. They will not. And whilst all of us are very keen to suggest that companies have great skills, and they do, many of them, they are not geared to essentially serving public good. That's the role of the state. And I finish by saying that sometimes I'm accused of being controversial. I argue that in Asia we need strong states because the 21st century will be very tough. And in a constrained planet, the strong state in Asia will be whatever you define it, so I'm not going to talk about democratic, social, communist, whatever. But it'll have to be able to impose draconian rules because we will have to share more. And we will have to also bring into reign the excesses of vested interests. So with that, I will stop and be happy to engage the panel in the discussion. Thank you very much. And please join me for lunch. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandran, for some of those very provocative thoughts. Actually, this does all bring us to focus more on what could be and what should be the role of the United Nations and ESCAP in particular in advancing the agenda, the post-2015 development agenda, and the issues we've just heard about. So at this point, I would like to call on the Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, to comment. And Madam Executive Secretary, if you could perhaps give us your views on what role the UN and ESCAP in particular can play in developing effective partnerships with the private sector in order to address the post-2015 development agenda. We'd very much like to hear what you've got to say.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. Thanks to the panel for sharing their thoughts. I think it's important to outline a few things up front before I also get on to some of the initiatives that the ESCAP has been promoting. The most effective partnerships are, of course, built around the unique value added brought by each of the partner. So it's important that as we proceed in this agenda, in terms of whether we go for philanthropic organization or corporate sector, that we look at some of the characteristics, elements, and also try to get the soul out, because after all, this will require looking beyond just the commercial elements of it. The comparative advantage of the United Nations lies in its moral authority, its convening power, as well as the extensive knowledge of and experience on sustainable development issues. The strengths of the private sector can be attributed to its solution-finding abilities, as well as potential resources available from a range of key stakeholders. I believe that harnessing these strengths through a mutually beneficial, well-defined, simple relationship would be a great way to go. And making sure that we are seeking to provide innovative solutions and strategies to advance the post-2015 development agenda, which is clearly a very extensive agenda, so there's plenty of scope to work within the niches of the different entities. Let me touch very briefly on the role of United Nations at large, and specifically the UN Global Compact. As you may be aware, the UN Global Compact is a strategic policy initiative for businesses that are committed to aligning their operations and strategies with 10 universally accepted principles in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. This initiative was launched by UN Secretary General in 2010. It offers a practical framework to promote sustainable business models and markets. Though this initiative, through this initiative, the United Nations aims to catalyze business action in support of United Nations goals and issues with an emphasis on collaboration and collective action. With over 12,000 corporate participants and other stakeholders from over 145 countries, it represents largest voluntary corporate responsibility initiative in the world. Using the UN Global Compact as well as Secretary General's guidelines on cooperation between the United Nations and business continuity, as an overall reference point, ESCAP has a strong record of building partnerships with private sector and foundations in order to contribute to positive sustainable development outcomes in the Asia and Pacific. On one hand, we have a relationship being built with Asia Pacific business leaders, and we have a dialogue on sustainable development with the Asia Pacific business leaders. We are hoping that we can move the ladder up a little bit from mid-size business business engagement to the top corporates now, and we will have a drive to that effect pretty soon. Of course, we will look at different dimensions. We will look at one, to learn from them on their sustainable production patterns to the extent they have. We will try, hopefully, to play a role of advocacy to promote thinking on sustainable production practices, and also trying to encourage more corporate social responsibility by having the corporates think about their communities to promote sustainable development agenda. So that's kind of the futuristic plan that we have. We of course would also like to build on some of the examples that have been very successful in Asia Pacific that our office has been promoting. In 2008, Goldman Sachs launched a women's empowerment project that aims to provide 10,000 women from developing countries with business education in order to enhance the economic empowerment of women. And I met the Asia Pacific head of Goldman Sachs very recently in China, and they're very proud of it. We are equally proud of it, and they are open to expanding this window with us. Through building on the rich experience of both partners as well as shared networks with governments and the private sector, we have a tradition of working quite well together, although we come from very different backgrounds. But we have managed to strengthen gender equality policies and programs within the confines of the group that we have been engaged with in Asia and the Pacific. I'm hoping that this will have a catalyzing effect going forward. A second interesting transaction that we are involved in is the collaboration with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. ESCAP has established integrated resource recovery centers in a number of Asian cities in order to tackle the management of organic waste. These centers have proven to be self-sustainable, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and provide a stable income source for urban dwellers. This is an area where the more we do, it would be less, because Asia Pacific has landscapes where we have a problem of a very high magnitude, creating a nuisance and a mess for the dwellers. So we would very much welcome philanthropic institutions to partner with us because of the magnitude of problem in this. ESCAP has also collaborated with Nippon Foundation and the Asia Pacific Development Center on Disability to demonstrate that businesses can be profitable by accommodating the needs and demands of close to 650 million persons with disabilities living in Asia and the Pacific. And I'm very proud to say that in a number of countries, we have a very good dialogue on this subject, thanks to our social division, where we are looking at inclusive models for disabled people. Now, if you look at the number of population in Asia, 650 million, this is larger market than even the Eurozone. I think every corporate in the world should accommodate disability and have disability, not only provisions, but elements. Unfortunately, thus far, it's been really confined to more developed environment. But I know I have visited places, and I can talk of my personal experience when I went to Aga Khan centers in the northern tribal areas, how with little money you can actually employ the disabled people, whether they are blind or they have some other disadvantages, and yet produce an environment which is ethically sound and caring, because the community starts caring about these people. So the partnership that we have has helped us pioneer the concept of disability inclusive businesses and led to creation of ESCAP Sasakawa Award for disability inclusive business in Asia and the Pacific. Another example that we are proud of that we have worked together with is Hilti Foundation. And I met their CEO very recently. We've been together conducting research and implementing housing that is affordable, eco-efficient, and disaster resilient. And this is an initiative that our division of Environment Development Division has been working with. There are currently plans underway to establish social enterprises that would produce the required building materials so as to ensure the long-term sustainability of the project. We have also talked about looking at other initiatives, but we'd like this to take off more in a number of other countries. Some countries we already have work underway. Furthermore, I'd like to mention that ESCAP reorients its strategic focus to further probe issues such as alternative financing mechanisms for development. The participation of private sector is clearly, to me, a very viable option in boosting economic growth in countries that may otherwise be constrained by limited budgets and borrowing capacity. I can talk of two experiences that I think have a very high potential of success because I've seen it. One is, of course, the inclusive finance and the participation of the corporate sectors with the financing companies to promote financial inclusiveness. And it is also akin to the impact investing, which has a great potential. You know, the JP Morgans of the world and others have been quite successful in India and other jurisdictions in trying to promote community development through their, of course, profits. And the way they do it, of course, they are looking at not losing money in the process, but also doing better on delivery than what government departments would do. So I think there is ample scope in that, which is going beyond the rhetoric to coming with concrete initiatives. And frankly, I would like to hear more of the concrete initiatives because it's these little efforts when pulled together will make a difference and encourage others to follow the good examples. So therefore for us, fostering partnerships between the United Nations and private sector, particularly in the region that I represent, is and will continue to be of high priority if we are to realize our vision of sustainable and inclusive global economy. I know that delivering in the government sector can be very high cost operation, while when you're using your own money to deliver services, you are very careful, but also the vigilance that you have on the disbursements and the use of the funds when communities are involved reduces very much the opportunities of corruption and wastage too. So it has inherently all the features that sustainable development goals are seeking for, And I know that everywhere I will travel, I'll be meeting the large and the mid-size private sector, including the financial sector, to make a very strong plea that Asia Pacific, which is a very dynamic region, strong potential, has substantial savings, looks at opportunities to create workable, simple, deliverable partnerships. I hope this is of some use to this platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Executive Secretary, for those very interesting comments. Now, we thought that we would show a video that perhaps puts some more focus on this region that we're in and looks specifically at the role of the private sector through a look at impact investing in the region. So I think if our video team is ready, we can cue that up and show this to you. It's about 3.5 minutes. Thank you.
Life on the barren Himalayan plateau has not changed much for generations. Every day, even the simplest task of cooking food poses real health and safety challenges to those living in this harsh environment. But now, thanks to a growing form of socially targeted investing, life is changing for some of those living in these isolated communities. With funding from so-called impact investors, Scott Frank's company One Earth Designs is beginning to mass-produce and sell for $128 a safe and fume-free solar-powered stove.
In 2010, fuel was running out, and the government enforcement of anti-wood cutting was increasing. And so people needed better alternatives. Wood, coal, and gas didn't work or were too expensive. But yet so much sun falls on the Himalayan plateau and all parts of the world that are lacking clean energy options.
Impact investing is a way of doing good while not giving away your money for good. The phrase will be more familiar to the wealthy of London or New York than it will to the billionaires of East Asia, but that is about to change. The region's economies have bloomed, but it is hard to point out the Carnegies, Rockefellers or Cadburys whose names will be remembered as the great philanthropists of the era. That's not to say Asians do not give, they do, but charity often remains closer to home with the extended family, or, as with tycoons like Li Ka-shing and Stanley Ho in Hong Kong, it is focused on education, healthcare and facilities. Asia, however, is home to 75% of the world's lowest income people and households. There is much more money in the hands of the wealthy that could be used for greater social gain than is used right now.
And we feel that Asia is tremendously well suited for impact investing because there's both capital and a need for that capital. A recent report identified $10 trillion, I believe, in high net worth assets in the region. And at the same time, we know that there's tremendous need in the form of affordable housing, healthcare for the aging, off-grid rural electricity access, water and sanitation.
As a form of doing good, impact investing is growing more popular in the US and Western Europe. Recent research by JP Morgan and the Global Impact Investing Network has found almost 100 wealthy people and funds put $36 billion into such investments. $8 billion of that was invested in the past year alone, and another $9 billion is projected for this year.
Businesses exist originally to serve the community, but unfortunately, as the world becomes increasingly globalized, many businesses have veered a bit too much to the profit-making side at the expense of the communities. So impact investing is about bringing businesses back to the original purpose of surviving, namely to serve communities.
Some things, such as building schools for the poorest parts of society, will never generate very high returns, if any at all. But others, such as microfinance, can be quite lucrative. Businesses such as One Earth may even ultimately turn into fully commercial listed companies.
We want to become the green apple. And so we want to be developing products and having revenues as well as benefits for the people who invest in us and to be able to take this company public.
If socially directed investing can find anything like the same playing field as profit-seeking capital, much more money should find its way to those in need. Paul Davies, Financial Times, Hong Kong.
Thank you very much. I hope that maybe put a few more thoughts there, and we look forward to some questions from the floor after we have one short round of questions with our panellists. And I'd just like to put one question each to you, perhaps, starting with ASHVIN. You know, you spoke very eloquently about accountability and you know, innovative approaches, for example, with renewable energy. The Sustainable Development Goals are expected to provide a new impetus to development efforts around the globe. So perhaps you could tell us a little more about how can philanthropic foundations support the effective implementation of this agenda? And also, how do philanthropic foundations help foster the formation of the partnerships that we've just heard from the Executive Secretary of ESCAP are such a priority between private and public sectors? What's your role as a philanthropic foundation?
I mean, I think I should, as someone working with a foundation that was sort of founded on oil and banking, just to sort of reflect back on what Chandan was talking about. I mean, I don't think anyone in the foundation actually thinks that philanthropy will or can save the world, so to speak, and I think that would be a dangerous notion. I think it's a catalyst, and it's something that can actually serve as a connector. But there are much bigger forces at play that need to drive the sort of big solutions, and so I completely endorse the view that, you know, government has to be at the center of this. It's also not about getting companies to behave as though they're NGOs or foundations. You know, sometimes it's funny. I see NGOs and foundations trying to behave more like companies, and companies trying to behave more like NGOs and foundations, and there are a lot of blurred lines in the middle. I think it's actually much more about how do we really think more deeply about how we align interests and capabilities to sort of solve some of the big challenges and problems that we're facing with a much greater sense of urgency than we currently seem to be able to do. And that's where I think philanthropy's role really kicks in. You know, one of the benefits of being an endowed foundation is you can take a long-term approach to a problem. You can invest in seeking solutions that no single actor has the incentive to invest in. You can take risks as long as you understand how those risks would then be managed. Obviously, if it affects, you know, you can't take risks that start affecting people on the ground. You can use innovative means of unlocking other resources in finance. You know, so that when we see the video about impact investing, you know, it's about creating some of the conditions around which others come in and start to invest, because you take the first loss, you do the de-risking, etc. And I think that's the sort of philosophy around how we try and construct partnerships. If I come back to the issue of energy and access to energy, we're not interested in renewable energy because we think poor rural communities need to take some responsibility for the world's climate change problem. Absolutely not. We're actually only interested in it because we think it's going to be one of the most effective, quickest ways to enable people who are not served currently by the grid to gain access to energy that's cleaner, that's safer, and that can be used to drive economic development, drive other social benefits within those communities. So it's not at all a green agenda per se. It's much more a pragmatic economic strategy. And this is where business comes in. So it's, again, working with companies who actually have no notion of themselves as being impact enterprises or social enterprises. They're just companies trying to make a sort of a profit. That's fine. It's the question of how do you then how do you bring those different elements together? So in the case of energy, you know, apart from providing some of the financing, you know, what philanthropies like us I think have a role to play in is how do you convene the different actors who have a stake in solving that problem? So on energy, you can't do anything on off-grid energy if the government doesn't have a strong vision and policy around that. Because 5 years from now, if the grid comes, no investors, no company is going to invest anyway because their investment is going to be made redundant. So you need a policy framework in which that happens. You then need companies who are actually capable and interested in running not one or two, but hundreds of plants. And then you need the NGOs and the civil society organizations who are going to come in and actually work with that in that construct to engage with communities, to make sure that people are getting actually a fair deal in this, to make sure that there's strong ownership over that. And that's a complex construct to put together. And there are elements in that chain that are not going to be paid for by anyone other than through philanthropic resources, because it's in nobody's interest to pay for stimulating micro-enterprise development alongside the energy service company. So I think it's those intersections between the different sectors and bringing them together. We're not trying to get companies to behave like NGOs. We're not trying to get NGOs to behave like companies. We're trying to integrate agendas and solve problems at greater scale and at a greater sense of urgency. That, I think, is where, from our perspective, the greatest opportunity lies. But we must be very careful about not blurring the lines on accountability. Ultimately, it is the role of government. And it is only with the support of government that an initiative like this with the private sector will actually ever work. Last thought, just on the question of accountability and how we get more awareness around the SDGs. I mean, I think there's an opportunity now as we look at the post-2015 agenda. You know, I think the UN Global Compact has been a great effort. I think we have to bring it down to much more localized discussion. You know, it's SMEs and small businesses and chambers of commerce in countries that are going to really make the difference, and not just the large multinational corporations who are generally the ones engaging in these sort of global dialogues. That's where we see the biggest traction. You know, it's working with the Hat Yai Chamber of Commerce, the Songkhla Chamber of Commerce on how to deal with the flood problem long term in Hat Yai. It's working with the South Gujarat Chamber of Commerce in Surat in India on trying to see how they're going to keep their city competitive for the next 20, 25 years. There's no multinationals involved in that discussion. I think Bangkok is a great example where, you know, Toshiba is a large Japanese corporation, a great experience on how the corporate sector comes together in a city like this to look at the flood problem more creatively and across sectors in the future. So those are the kinds of things that I think we can help with as a philanthropic organization.
So you're essentially talking about involving SMEs and really focusing more on SMEs.
Absolutely.
Well, that parlays perfectly into our next speaker's points, I hope, which is for Kun Kop Khan. You told us about the Thai situation extremely eloquently also, but as a representative of one of the biggest multinationals here, and you are also dealing with Asia-wide as well as the world, can you perhaps maybe also look at, maybe some of the issues ASHVIN raised, but also Asian business per se, which I think has more of a reputation compared to Western business of being relatively slow in adopting some of these responsible business practices and principles of corporate social responsibility. Why do you think this is? And perhaps you can also address what ASHVIN just said. Thank you.
As I have said before, I think in the past many of the private companies would think that they would do it, but later. They have to make money first. But after many crises have happened, they realize that actually this is their duty now. It's not, they cannot only wait for the government or for angels coming down to help us. So therefore, we have to start from ourselves. And I think what Mr. Chandran have said, this is our approach. In order to help ourselves and also help the community, it is not the money, but it is how to help them to help themselves. And that is the key. So what we are now doing, and hopefully to do more in the future, will be that we are not going to donate anything. I mean, definitely there might be some donation and whatnot, but moreover, how to teach them and train them and give them encouragement and give them opportunity for the people to work in the same direction and win-win. And the Chamber of Commerce is now making the policy. We have, as I have said, we cannot touch everything, but we need to select what we can do. And they have selected about 7 areas where we would like to do. But if we are going to do this, we are going to do for the whole supply chain from the beginning until the end. and how to help the farmers, how to help the agriculture business, of which I mean they are really in great need, in order for them to survive, but not only to survive, but how to make them create a value-added business, link with the big corporation, and then link with the market or market trend in the future. And I can give another good example. I'm also in the board of one of the bank called Kasikorn Thai Bank. Kasikorn Thai believes that they have to do something to help the country. And one of the main issues, as I have said before, is a flood. We either we face with flood or we don't have enough water. We always like this. So water management, how can we help the country? So Kasikorn select one province in Thailand called Nan province. That is one of the main source of the water to Chao Phraya River. The forest in Nan mountains, 70% already disappeared. Gone. No trees left. But why? Who cut them? Actually, we have found out that the people who cut them are the local villagers. They cut them in order to grow corn. Because they believe that, not they believe, actually it was true, that the income from selling corn will be much higher. And they need to grow corn because their hometown, they do not have enough water. They used to be farmers. But because of the mismanagement of the water, so therefore no water left. So they need to switch from rice to corn. So they started to invade the forest. So it's the villagers. So how can we catch the villagers into the jail? We believe that actually they do it because they want to live, they want to survive. So what Kasikorn Bank is trying to do is to understand the problem, but not giving them the money. Not giving them the money, but how to give them the direction that they should go back to their hometown and help them with the water management so that they can go back to maybe the same or similar agriculture like rice, but not the same kind of rice because we face a problem of the price of the rice, but maybe more of the value-added rice crop so that they can stay where they are. And at the same time, when we going to plant the forest, replant the forest, we will not go back to the same forest because that kind of forest will not give them money. So we are now making the research how to turn the empty land into the forest where they can make profit out of that. Instead of growing teak wood, for example, of which we don't want them to cut anyway, can they grow mango tree? Can they grow fruits? Can they grow some other kind of plants so that they can survive with the rice, new kind of rice, and at the same time they can make the forest as their supermarket. Every day they go into the forest, they don't need to cut anything, they can get something and sell, and they can survive. So this is more of the mentoring. This is more of the training. And this is how the private sector will try to do. And if we can stop the invasion of the forest, we believe that we can help to prevent further flood. We can help the country in order to have enough water for the agriculture in the future. Water is precious. And in order to come up with this, and this is the thing that we think that we can do. So I would like to end my speech by saying that it's to help them to help themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we could perhaps hear from Chandran. So you talked about key priorities, questioning economic models, suggesting rethinking pricing of natural natural resources, etc. But in the context of sustainable development, perhaps you could look at how social investment by the private sector and philanthropic organisations differs from the more traditional development funding models, and what is required to encourage the private sector to invest in sort of more socially conscious agenda or development agendas.
I mean, the simple answer to the last bit of your question is tougher rules. I think it's... Well, why should it be just make more attractive? Public good is not a trade-off simply by making it more attractive for a business person. By the way, I come from a business background, so I'm not anti-capitalist. I live in Hong Kong. I love money. I pay higher rents than all of you. So just in case you think I'm some kind of green, yogurt drinking, bicycle riding, sandal, tie-dye kind of person, just bear with me, okay? So, but I mean, my point is that we have to change the narrative. The narrative is old, and we have. So I make myself slightly unpopular by saying inconvenient things. The video is an example of narratives that we just saw. Come to Asia, and some young Westerner is going to save the world. And some foundation from the US will have a young woman spokesman who was going to change the world. That stuff is old. I know that stuff. Stoves, 100 organizations in India, Bangladesh do that stuff. It's old. It's narratives. So this is very important. People talk about social enterprises, and I've been in this mix in Asia for like 5 years, and all I've seen is background noise. I can give you, 10 projects I'm involved in, and I think the Executive Secretary was very right to talk about specifics, but that would be just sort of magnifying some of my work, and I'm not interested in that. You can go to my website and see what we kind of do. But as a social enterprise, most people who are in the space can't manage their way out of a bag. You would not want to give them $10 and say invest. So narratives are important. But it's become very trendy to talk about social investments. I said to you, my organization is a think tank, but it's not funded by anybody because I got a big mouth and I need the freedom of speech. So I don't take money from anybody. I can't take on fast food companies if I take money from, those companies. They're not bad, but that's what they do, right? So, but it's important from a point of view of investments as well, not to be reliant. I think Kun Kopka made a very important point. Companies must play a very important point by not just giving. We've seen development aid essentially, do some things, but I'm more in the camp of dead aid. If any of you are interested, read the book. Years of aid in Africa because everyone felt guilty about raping and pillaging the continent for about 200 years, and they gave money, and nothing changed. I lived in Africa, I worked in Africa, and I saw all of this. So we have to change the narrative, and ideas matter just as important as going and saving saving rainforests, which are very important, but we need to understand the root cause of why the forests are being impinged, why the floods are coming to Bangkok. I mean, I lived in Thailand for many years. And frankly, you get floods in the floodplains if you put concrete all over it. Very simple. If you put concrete all over the floodplains of a major river system to build factories, then I'm sorry, when it rains, and upstream people cut some forests too, because farm gate prices are not what they need to be, I'm sorry, it all conspires to give you the mother of all floods. So let's really understand the fundamentals. So my job, and I work with many multinationals, I sit with many CEOs. At the moment, I'm a member of the World Economic Forum's Corporate Sustainability and Governance Global Agenda Council. And when I first joined it, I was shocked at the discussions taking place. It was more of the same. How can we do a bit of environmental this and environmental that? A bit of philanthropy, a bit of CSR. It's just nonsense. It's not saying that you shouldn't do some of that. But if we are talking about governance and we're talking about sustainability, then there's a more fundamental, very difficult questions to be asked. And that's really where I think the private sector has to play a role, but it has to be re-educated. Its entire economic understanding has to be deconstructed, and policymakers had to be at the forefront of deconstructing that narrative. And that, I think, is a very important thing. And one of the things I do, and in a way, what I do is a social enterprise. I take no money from anyone. My mission is to change the narrative, whether you like it or not, and you might not agree. And I am free to do what we think. So we should not think about the social mission purely as one of helping poor people through providing things. Ideas matter. We have to be able to monetize ideas so that they become mainstream. And if I'm to be slightly pushy here, you know, the narrative of business has been defined in the last 30 years by the business schools, who monetized very silly ideas and sold it to the rest of the world. And we in Asia send our best kids to the Whartons and the Harvards to learn that the world is flat, apparently. And if you all have mobile phones in India, it'll all be okay. So we have to monetize very different ideas. I will therefore say, I can give you one example of, because I think examples are important, though I'm more interested in challenging this discussion about what is sustainable development as well. But one example I've been involved in is a woman in Indonesia, many of you might know, Ibu Pumi, who runs an NGO promoting rural electrification. And the problem is, you know, people like that and the others in Thailand, Vietnam, they all get awards. And I keep telling them, stop getting awards, because this is a distraction. They all getting awards because those who want to have people glorified as the people who do these things are always willing to give you prizes. But ask them to invest in your business model, and they will not. And I know a lot of examples of this. So what we try and do is to try and give them business models and connect them with investors. I'm not calling them social investors either, and they're definitely not philanthropists. I can't connect them. So, but before you do that, you need to disabuse them of their utopian ideas. Both the people who have these grand ideas, and you have to, as Kun Kopkan said, you have to give them the tools. So one of the things we do, and I won't go into the details, is help them write a business plan. Because many of these people in the social enterprise space want to do all of these things, but they say, can you put me in touch with a rich person who will give me $1 million so I can save the world? Well, it's not so simple. But you say, okay, I think I know a few people. I live in Hong Kong. I know quite a lot of rich people, both in Hong Kong, China, etc. Many of these people are in fact tired privately of philanthropic activity. They've seen much of their money squandered. They don't see the effects because people like us are trying to say, come on, make the money work. And then you ask them for a business plan, and they can write 2 pages. And I think you mentioned this on your call yesterday, which resonated with me. There's 2 problems with it. One is it has to fit in with the tyranny of finance. You know, only the bankers understand the mumbo jumbo, nobody else does. And secondly, it's English. So if you can't write English, which is the point you made, lose. So you have to help them. But the key point is the business models. So this particular one in Indonesia, we managed to help convince, firstly, that they needed to move from a donor-based, non-grid hydroelectric renewable system to an investment model. And you then hone in on what is the key barrier towards any investor coming into rural non-grid electrification. It's return. Why is the return so poor? Mainly because it's competing against fossil fuel-based grids. Then we brought in the regulator of the Indonesian Electricity Board and said, listen, at the same time, Indonesia is concerned about the loss of forests. Same issues here. And the loss of forests is happening because of concessions, and this is not just Indonesia, around the world, to business interests, vested interests. We are all implicated for underpricing resources, for all the goodies we like. But if you priced the thing properly, then it would change. If you want to protect the forest, so we said to the regulatory authority, the forest provides an ecosystem service. What is the price of that? Well, it's difficult. But here's an example where if you said every rural hydroelectric scheme that has an investor would be able to sell the electricity, excess electricity, to the main grid with a tariff price that then took into account the natural resource systems services, then you're competitive. So then you compete with the subsidized fossil fuel mainstream electricity, and he agreed. So then we did the entire financial calculations. But you need to be able to do the financial calculations, because otherwise it's just, hey, give me a fair price because I'm saving the forest. You have to show the economics, because then you have to show it to the investors. So that's an example of actually doing it. But the other point, last point I will make, and I think I'm taking up my time, is when you talk to companies, I think the real important thing for companies is to look at their core business activity first. What is sustainable and not sustainable? I've done workshops with many companies, with their executive leaders, etc., and then given them examples. And when you say, put up your hand and say which one is unsustainable, there's a great discomfort. But that's where you need to go. You need to check inside and then morph into new things. So those are the things I would start talking about. Any food company that says it's sustainable but sells bottled water, and I won't name any, is talking hubris. That's where they should start before writing a check.
Okay.
And the banks too.
Thank you very much. Finally, in this section, I'd like to turn to Andrew. Your organisation has been described as a lever for change in societies, and you yourself came to this from a background in banking, amongst other things. But what role could you have a look at? What role does venture philanthropy play in catalysing change? And apart from funding, how do you facilitate the transfer of knowledge and technology, not just funding from one section to another?
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to be very, very brief because I want to learn from the questions and respond to what people want to ask. I'd like to pick up one thing from the video that just a comment on that as well. That there is a continuum of types of money, from donated money, from philanthropic money, through to impact investing. And I have a slight concern that there is a lurch towards the impact investing as being the answer to all things, without sometimes the recognition of, and ASHVIN made a very good point on the way in which philanthropic money can be catalytic and convene and take risks. But if all of the resource available was to lurch towards the impact investing end of that spectrum, I think we miss developing some of the impact investable opportunities of the future. So I sometimes worry that in some parts of the region that there is perhaps not that sense of philanthropic requirement that's still vital to get to the impact. But it's all balance. I think the point, as I say, that was made about the philanthropic capital creating the environment for other things to happen is very important. You asked me specifically about what we might do in terms of knowledge transfer, and that plays very nicely into a commercial that we're in the process of developing, a knowledge centre to be that curator or recipient curator and deliverer of knowledge down the various verticals of philanthropic engagement, of due diligence, impact measurement, reporting, portfolio management. So we are moving towards trying to build an interactive platform for members and for people engaged throughout the funding and throughout the sector to gather information and to benefit from that information and what they do. But I think everything, and this is resonating with many of the other comments, everything for me is about building the strength and the resilience in the social purpose organisations, in the SMEs, and even in the communities themselves, looking more broadly. It's about building the resilience to take resource and to turn that resource into something and to become sustainable. It's about everyone working towards, in a philanthropic sense anyway, strong, sustainable exits and building the strength in the sector that can take the investable or the investment capital into the future. So my plea or whatever is to invest in the capacity of the communities and the social purpose organisations to then really take the investment and roll it forward. I said I would be brief. You're not ready for me. I said I was going to be brief, so I'll stop at that.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much, and we'll soon move to questions from the floor, but first I'd like to invite Joanne Nung, the representative of Temasek Foundation of Singapore, which has moved very heavily into some of these areas that we've been discussing. Joanne, perhaps you can give us your view.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Am I on?
Yes,
right,
we can hear you.
Well, I'm really enjoying a lot of the discussions that's going on, hearing a lot of good stuff. I'll just like to make 2 points, but before that, I want to say that Temasek Foundation, we do our work in Asia. We give our grants to Asia for development work in the area of education, healthcare, public education, or rather public administration, and urban development or urban management. Where do we find ourselves? Our space really is working with the state. I know that we talked about having the central government playing a central role, or rather the government playing a central role, and there is a lot that civil society and the public and the private sector can do. But what we have done is we think that having capable people in the government can run, and they can run capable institutions, and we hope that that can go across, they can do their part in their own societies and the nations that they are running. So what we have done is to work with the states in the last 7 years. And one of the things that I like to say, the first point I like to make is that in our work, where we have been privileged to be invited by governments to come in and talk about the work that they do in the areas that I spoke about, we found that it is important that they get to tell us what they are looking for. And many times when, there was a comment yesterday about not looking to foundations just for funds. Yes, the funds do come, but we do hope that they tell us what they're looking for, because they think that sometimes clients think we have prepared sets, like, when you go to McDonald's, you look for set A and set B. We have those sets of solutions. But we sit down and we ask them, what is it that you are looking for? Because everyone is different. It's not one size fitting all. And we can customize. We'll try to have the solutions customized to what outcomes you're looking for. An example is that I sat down with one particular organization, one particular government organization, and they are looking for setting of standards for, well, let's just say building. And when we got down to that, we said, all right, now, they brought out certain other standards that they had previously, and when we got down to asking, now what do these standards mean to you? How did you implement these standards? And after some discussion among themselves, we realized that they were not able to answer our question. Well, the set of standards that were done before were given to them, were done for them. So my point is we need to talk to them, customize what they need, empower them. Empower governments, empower clients as foundations, empower them to do what they need to do and not give the funds. We have found that to be, we hope that in our whole modest way that we have done that across in the last 7 years. We are going back in these few years to be talking to them again to see how things have been. It's about empowerment, and I like the point about taking a longer view, a longer-term view, as ASHVIN has said, on these solutions and not just a shot in the arm. So first point, talk to them. As foundations, we found it useful to talk to them and figure out with them. It is not a package we're giving without talking to you first, without realizing what you're looking for. The other thing the other point I'd like to make is about sustainability of these outcomes that we are talking. When we were new as a foundation, we wanted to build capability in the areas of technical and vocational education. And then we thought because we thought that that's going to be a very quick way of releasing and providing skilled labor into the economy. And this is where the economies in Asia, in this part of the world, they do need these technical skills very quickly, particularly when the economy suffered in 2008. We thought when the economy picked up, they need these skilled labor. Now, as time went by, we learned ourselves that if we want this to be sustainable, we asked the first question: do you have industries in your place? Do you have industries to be able to absorb these people? Also, we found that a lot of times they were not linking up with industries. So if we concentrated on only building capability in terms of pedagogy, curriculum development, leadership and management of these colleges, the graduates were going nowhere. So we started looking, we now ask the questions: do you have industry partners? Well, one up, we now ask, do you have the equipment for these training? Because if you do not have the equipment, after all that, you will not have the skilled labor we're talking about. We now have, in fact, there are some countries I've visited, what they have done is that if, for example, Toyota, they have factories, all right, in Indonesia, and they connected with these colleges, and they provided their cars as training equipment. So that, and they also allowed them to be in their factories when they needed the industrial attachments. So now we're starting to ask these questions. So we have found that for foundations, we're looking at how sustainable can your solutions be? How sustainable can our solutions be? The other question we started asking in other places is there a career development, a career counseling type of service for these kids, for these youth? So we are starting to build that into. And we're beginning to see, and we do hope to see as we go back in the years to come, that things will be improving, because in these partnerships that we talk about, we do exit. We exit so that we want to see that the empowerment has happened. And I hope that as we go back, we find ourselves as a new foundation, we find that we will have made an impact in these societies that we have given funds to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to invite questions from the floor. We've got a little bit of time. We could take a few questions, if you can keep your questions brief, please, and that gentleman there, if you'd like to. And then we'll move to the lady there, please.
I'm George Rian from India, representing the civil society. While we are talking about the role of private sector in the post-2015 development agenda and the programs and the strategies, I would like to specifically quote an example from India that is also in continuation to the suggestion from the panel that the tougher rules will work. This CSR and philanthropy and all are nothing new to the private sector or the businesses in India. But recently, all this thing will work in a very strong legislative environment. Recently, last year, the Government of India had amended the Companies Act, and the new CSR rules came into effect from 1st of April 2014. As per the new CSR rules, it says that any company which make a profit of 50 million and above, an average of the profit of the last 3 years, 2%, at least 2% has to be spent for the CSR. Earlier also the CSR work was there. And the interesting thing is there is the overall objective is to contribute towards the inclusive growth and the development. and specific sectors are identified for this. And interestingly, most of these things are, either the goals of the MDGs or the proposed goals of the SDGs. For example, eradicating the hunger and the poverty, child rights, maternal health, promoting education, environmental sustainability, things like that. So what I want to mention, and this had started working very, very well, though it is only a few months, and the government is very closely monitoring. That means the overall inclusive development strategy of the country, the companies need to contribute, at least 2% of their profit. So what I want to make the suggestion is, in the SDGs also, there has to be strong provision to engage with the private sector, and guidelines to the member state to have very strong rules in place to have a engagement of the private sector in contributing towards SDGs. Madam Executive Director had ESCAP Director had mentioned about the United Nations Global Compact and how the ESCAP is engaging with the businesses, but the SDGs should have very strong provisions and the guidelines. This is my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That reprises Chandran's point, I think, also of a strong government framework. Would any of the panellists have a comment they'd like to make? Right, Chandran, if you could keep it very short, and we'll move to the next question.
I know I go on. I'll just make a very small comment. I'm trying to initiate in the Asia-Pacific region a Pan-Asian fund. But one of the requirements I'm suggesting is that central banks in Asia essentially mandate financial institutions to make a contribution to not a Pan-Asian fund, but a local fund. And if you look at the numbers, and I have a paper on this, the numbers are significant. But even if they mandated 1%, we run into a huge amount. Then the question is, how do you manage it? But that's a more detailed discussion. But it is mandating and not suggesting that financial institutions will voluntarily act in the interest of public good.
Thank you. Again, that's you're reinforcing the critical nature of government involvement there. This sort of thing can't happen without, I presume, legislation in a lot of the places. Kun Kop Khan, okay, very quickly.
And for Chamber of Commerce in Thailand, we also promote one company, one community. We encourage, especially the one who is capable enough in order to help their supply chain or one community. But again, it's not donation. It's to go, send your staff to help, mentoring, teaching, training.
But this is voluntary, right? This is not a government thing. This
voluntary.
is yes.
Yes.
That's also a very positive trend that's happening with business, asking its members to do this. We'll move to the question that was coming from over there. Thank you.
Thank you. I am Marjorie Pamintuan. I'm from the Asia Pacific Research Network, and I'm also with the Asia Pacific CSO Engagement Mechanism. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. We CSOs feel that there's also a need to differentiate between the different private sector actors, and we appreciate the fact that statements are being made here that we need to take care of SMEs. However, we would like to call the attention of everybody to the accountability of corporations to the people, who, because of globalization, have grown so large and powerful that they can influence development strategies at all levels and can impact the lives and livelihoods of people negatively or even positively. We feel that we need a binding framework to ensure the accountability of corporations to the people, because we believe that they are also part of the solutions to several global challenges in the post-2015 development agenda. However, we have known that their actions have had severe impacts on the human and collective rights, especially of indigenous peoples and in the communities where they operate. Governments are equally accountable because they provide the enabling environment for corporations, and it is also their responsibility to protect the people and provide access to remedy. For us CSOs, we have the following proposals to make. First is to frame business partnerships or partnerships with the private sector, especially with corporations, with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, and supplement these principles with the binding enforcement measures, including legislation, adjudication, and penalties for violations. We wish to reiterate that CSR is not the same as complying with the UNGP, as erring corporations can launch CSR projects while violating human rights at the same time. We also wish support for the UN Nation Human Rights Council draft resolution regarding the elaboration of an international legally binding instrument on transnational corporations and other business enterprises with respect to human rights. Third, at the regional and global level, we wish to consider the reinstating the equivalent or an equivalent of the former UN Center on Transnational Corporations to monitor TNCs and help ensure that states respect their commitments and to regulate them. And lastly, at all levels, we wish to ensure that participation of CSOs and local communities in the mechanism, ensuring the accountability of corporations, and with that, help them keep the public good and the public welfare at heart. From this session, we have been hearing positive messages on accountability, ethics, and standards. And from us CSOs, we also wish to know how they want or how they envision those accountability to be put into action.
Thank you very much. I think ASHVIN would like to address that point. And then we have, we'd like also after that to hear from any member states that would like to raise any issues, and then we'll move into closing. So ASHVIN, over to you.
Just very quickly, thank you for that. I would, I'm not sure if this is on. So, yeah, I would completely concur that I don't think the raising of the issues of SMEs should be seen as a sort of a rebalancing away from this issue of accountability of corporations, large corporations especially. I think this is really an area where government has to play the lead role in providing the framework for that dialogue and for that engagement, and for that sort of space for the discussion and for the negotiation about what is development, even in a particular national context. Too often right now we're seeing that debate framed in a sort of a negative light, that if you are challenging or questioning, you are somehow anti-development, anti-growth. And that's really not conducive to the kind of discussions we're going to need to have as we enter the SDG sort of period. So I would fully support that view, and I think governments especially need to create the room for that dialogue, and be careful not to sort of dismiss a conversation as being sort of somehow being labeled as anti-development or anti-growth, because that will take us in a very dangerous path, especially when we're trying to focus on sustainability.
Thank you very much, and thanks for raising the issue of accountability. Extremely important. We've had two expressions of interest from delegates, so I'd first like to call on the distinguished delegate of Japan to comment on the proceedings today. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Madam Moderator and panelists sharing your wisdom. I'm Toru Adachi from Embassy of Japan. And since ongoing MDGs were developed, we, international society, have gotten a lot of progress represented by poverty reduction as a result of cooperation between countries, civil societies, international organizations like ESCAP, and private sectors. Japan has also made a lot of contribution, for example, through ODA. On the other hand, we also know there are some emerging issues in addressing MDGs. One of the issues is the wealth gap. While we seek the sustainable development, the fruits of development have to be delivered to each individual in the idea of people-centered approach. In this regard, we Japan think the promotion of universal health coverage is important. We should aim at satisfying broader health and medical needs based on people-centered approach of promoting universal health coverage. In the medical area, the role of the private sector is very important through supplying medicines and medical services and insurances, etc. Here, my question is that how do you think the public-private partnership in the future should be in medical area in balancing between macro development, I mean the accumulation of the profit of the private companies or like that, and the individual equality toward 2015 development agenda? Thank you.
Thank you very much. A highly relevant issue. Would any of the panelists specifically like to address the health, Chandran?
I mean, just very quickly, I think on the health issue, and particularly with regard to drugs for major diseases, etc., this has been an ongoing debate for many years. I will come back to my point that the license to operate in various developing countries for large pharmaceutical countries should include, in my view, a provision for appropriate pricing mechanisms and make these drugs available at the appropriate price. So you can, in fact, design differential pricing schemes, etc. We've all heard the pharmaceutical companies with their lawyers provide elaborate arguments for how this is against free trade, WTO, this, etc. This is again the role of the state. And if you look at many parts of Asia, the investments in drugs, and then you've all heard about this. I mean, it's criminal what's going on in many parts of this region in terms of that. And I think the states have to be very important. Coming back to the earlier point, whilst I'm a big believer in multilateral agreements, I think multilateral agreements have many, many benefits. They're also hugely constrained. And I have always argued that the responsibility begins with the state. And the state needs to be much more stringent and tough on these issues. And if I look at just climate change as an example, I believe we wasted 20 years because somehow vested interests thought a multilateral agreement on trade, carbon trading would solve the global problem. And then we found out that, of course, this is not possible. And if you look today, after 20 years wasted on something like that, the developing countries are taking their own actions, and perhaps China and India are taking unilateral action at their lowest level. And for climate change, if China and India did their own thing and did it well, that would do more for climate change than anything else. And so coming back to medicine, it's the same thing in my view. But it would essentially confront the status quo of how trade rules are written, etc., which, by the way, were not written by the developing world.
Yes, ASHVIN, very
Just
quickly.
a quick comment on the health question, because this is something that we do a lot of work on. There is no question that there is the private sector is going to bring a lot of innovation, a lot of technology on the drug side, but also on medical devices, etc. But the bottom line is that it's very well understood, if you're a health economist, which I'm not, but I talk to them quite often, is that ultimately there is a trade-off in terms of public finance versus private finance, and it's about getting that balance right. And to some extent, you do need to crowd out an overdependence on private finance and out-of-pocket payments if you want to actually have a more equitable health system. Thailand actually did a very good thing a few years ago in terms of trying to recognize that. But there's a conflict between the 30 baht scheme on the one hand and the fact that we have Bumrungrad Hospital, which is a global center for attracting medical tourism. Those two things are actually technically in conflict with each other if you're looking at universal health coverage as your ultimate goal, which we fully support and which the UN General Assembly endorsed, I think, last year. So I think the health financing question is really at the heart of the question of where do we put the role of the private sector, and getting that balance right is going to be the most important question.
Thank you very much. And Andrew, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would fully endorse the universality aspect, but I was just going to add that private resource developing health solutions, I think, provides or creates the opportunity for the models like social impact bonds, where there would be savings to government purse, to public sector purse, downstream from smart solutions, where private sector can take risk and can take develop new services and develop and assume risk that ultimately the investment can be repaid from the savings achieved by governments from those advancements.
Thank you very much.
May I add on a bit?
Yes, of course.
Because this is still under debate in the Chamber of Commerce as well, as I think all of you have touched on. But it's the balance whether we should be medical hub in Thailand or we think about the majority. We also debate whether we should encourage hospital to be listed in the stock market or not, because now some of our big hospital chains already listed. And once you're in the stock market, you need to perform. And that will increase costs more. So it's still the issue. And this is a good point that we hope that we can come up with a better balance in the future.
This is a very, very important insight. Thank you very much.
Again, can I just add one example? There's an example in Vietnam at the moment of a small Vietnamese company that is essentially providing postnatal care equipment. Many of you will know that several million babies die a year around the world simply for lack of access to postnatal care breathing technology. But the technology, because we are also investments going to technology, have become so advanced that developing countries can't own this. And there's a small company in Vietnam that's essentially taken the core technology and stripped it to its basics. What then you do is you have to activate an investor base in the developing world to essentially put money into this, and this is happening. So I just wanted to give an example how you can get companies involved. And one or two very large medical equipment companies are interested in this. Others are shying away from it because of their self-interest, but this is possible.
It's a very good point, and I could just also add the example of Indonesia, I think, where you might see a massive increase in public health spending, and hospitals that have no equipment are likely will see a lot of spending on medical devices and big ticket items. So that's another thought for private sector involvement, I think. So thank you for that question. It's a very good one. We'll move along to Bangladesh, and I'd like to call on the distinguished delegate to raise your question. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Actually, this has been a unique opportunity for me, since I am from the public sector, from the government, to listen from the business leaders, private sector business leaders, regarding their involvement in the development efforts. It is encouraging that they are already, in different dimensions, they are already involved in development efforts of the governments. One thing I just like to thank Mr. Chandra Nayar. You have referred to very difficult and formidable challenge in engaging private sector into development efforts, particularly, and your concern is more true for large-scale infrastructure involvement, development, participation of private sectors, because there is always a big conflict between public goods and the profit. This is a very challenge. We have to find a way how to meet the challenge. To refer to Madam Executive Secretary, you have rightly pointed out that today's session and yesterday's session was only focused on accountability. Accountability on the context of a post-2015 development agenda. And now, post-2015 development agenda has been identified to be a unified development agenda, unified in the sense that till now, our focus has been poverty eradication. And now, with this concern, the global concern, we have now sustainability. And these two concerns has prompted the world leaders to identify the post-20 development agenda as a unified. In the same place, it's also global. Unlike the MDGs, any post-2015 development agenda should be global. Global in the sense that it will be equally achievable for the poor countries and the developed countries. But still, there must be some more focus on the developing countries, because they still lag behind the developed countries. And particularly, this session is what will be the role of private sector in promoting the post-2015 development agenda. Just what the businesses do and what the public sector do. We actually, our intention is to serve the people. We serve in exchange of, say, my monthly salary, my commitment to people, enjoyment of vote, being elected to parliament, being in the government. And for the private sector, profit. Profit, social position, enjoyment, all the good things. But Now the question is how to force the two interests. For the public sector, our main concern is that people are happy. If people are happy, we are satisfied. And we are successful. And for the public sector, also, your concern should be on that people are satisfied, people are served in exchange of, and their target is, again, the same term, profit. And how can sustainably you can promote your profit sustainable way? That is the question. That is the partnership. And the private sector has been identified as one of the most important partner in the recent global deliberation on development partnership. You know, the Busan Declaration on Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation has identified very importantly, along with other source of development cooperation, private sector has been importantly taken away. So, in a sustainable way, you can different levels within different dimensions, you can help build this partnership and help the sustainable development in your production process, in making the people habit to a sustainable consumption. These are very important. And also, making your profit in sustainable ways so that it is affordable, like the concern raised by Japan. This is also our concern. How can help the private sector help the health sector by promoting pharmaceuticals in an affordable way? And I will request the Executive Secretary to convey the message from ESCAP area that the Development Cooperation Forum of the UN is actually the global forum for forging all this development cooperation along with the private sector. And development cooperation, DCF should take the lead in forging all types of these activities for promoting a true partnership towards sustainable development. And that will bring result. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I ask the floor if there are any other questions? We have one over there and we have several. Okay, we've got another 15 minutes or so perhaps please you can start afterwards.
Yes, I'm Grace Balawag from the Indigenous Peoples International Center for Policy Research and Education, and I also represent the CSOs. We fully appreciate the reiteration of some of our panelists and discussants today and yesterday on our most important concern on the implementation of the human rights-based approach on to development. This would include clear business ethics and environmental protection, as mentioned by one of our panelists from the Toshiba Corporation. But this goes beyond the human rights accountabilities that private corporations should also adhere to. Of course, for the future Sustainable Development Goals and post-2015 development agenda, the important role of the private sector towards innovations and partnerships is of utmost importance in ensuring environmental and social accountabilities and in making sure that human rights principles are fully adhered to by the private sector, especially in providing dignified workplaces without discrimination according to gender identity, and ethnicity, among others. Okay. And as mentioned by our UN ESCAP Secretary, we also recommend reference to the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which should serve really as our guide for states and private sector in ensuring the social and environmental accountabilities of corporations and on public-private partnerships. Representing the indigenous peoples, one of our basic concerns is an increasing investment of public-private partnerships, especially on extractive industries within the remaining world's natural resources. And most often, these are located within the lands, territories, and resources of indigenous peoples and local communities. These are causing displacements and more impoverishment, actually, of indigenous peoples and local communities. And due to their active defense of their lands and resources for survival, more often than not, they are also being criminalized as human rights defenders and also harassing their own leaders. As in relation to this, as UN reported, there are at least 350 million indigenous peoples around the world, which is 5% of the global population, and 15% of the poorest of the poor are amongst indigenous peoples. The majority of indigenous peoples are really here in Asia-Pacific region, and they continue to be marginalized and discriminated. With this, it is thereby important to understand and respect the human rights and aspirations of indigenous peoples, workers, women, youth, among other sectors of the civil society, which we think are really critical partners in achieving sustainable development. In this context, having said that, our main ask, as reiterated by one of our speakers also, is on how do the states and the private sector really perceive the human rights accountability mechanisms. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, this is really beyond the corporate social responsibilities that the corporations have are adhering to, so it should go beyond that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Some very relevant issues there. Would any of our panelists like to comment on? It does touch on your theme, Chandran, of natural resources and the pricing of and the deals on natural resources. But
I'll just say something.
Yes, and then Kun Kobkan briefly. And
yeah, I mean, very quickly, the quick answer to the discussion is that, and I speak to a lot of CEOs about this privately, corporations don't do sustainable development. And we should disabuse everyone of this notion. Corporations can do better efficiency, environmental protection, etc., and that is the difference from sustainable development. And the gentleman from Bangladesh mentioned consumption. Corporations don't do less consumption, and ultimately the challenge of our times is the price of consumption, right? So corporations don't do less, they do more. It doesn't make them bad. But if we want sustainable development, etc., then there is the role of the state. Second point I would make is, and it's very interesting listening to some people, the unfortunate reality is most people in the world don't trust companies. Sorry. Survey after survey will show that most people, I mean, it's slight hypocrisy on our parts, don't trust companies, but companies are not trusted. Banks are the most untrusted at the moment, investment banks. So there is a problem in our perception, therefore, of how the community at large, which is supposed to be consulted on this, perceives corporations. So I think there needs to be a different framing of the role of companies. Companies don't do sustainable development. They do efficiency. They can be made to reduce their emissions, etc. They don't do reduce consumption, which is the sustainable development challenge of our times. Finally, I think we have to redefine what we mean by human rights. And it's a longer discussion. But human rights, in my view, in this part of the world, as stated by the woman from Philippines, is essentially the right to the resource base. And then we can talk about everything, because it starts with food, secure water, etc. I would put freedom of speech somewhere after about number 6. But that's a different narrative, okay?
And thank you very much. And I think, Kun Kobkan, you had a very brief, as business.
As business.
I'm sure some of us trust you.
Yeah. I mean, for the private sector, they are the good ones. And of course, the other ones. And for example, my company, we believe that everyone is equally important. No one is more and no one is less. Everyone is equal to one red brick. We call it the red brick concept. And so therefore, whether you're a Japanese president or you're the Thai driver or you're Thai workers and whatnot, everyone is no more and no less than one red brick. And we treat them equally. But then the other companies, I think nowadays, as I have said, have changed. because there's a requirement nowadays. The perception of the people that we are capitalists, we are only making profit. In order for the business to survive, we have to change. So therefore, for example, in Thailand, we are lacking of manpower. Seriously, lacking of manpower. So I think in the past maybe 2-3 months, you can see that when something happened and the Myanmar workers, Cambodian workers return to their hometown, many things happen. This forced the other companies to really take care of the people, salary-wise, welfares and whatnot. And so this is the good time that we will have to do it anyway. You will have to do it anyway. And but it's a good time because now the government, I think, trying to talk to the Chamber of Commerce and Federation of Thai Industry that to make things into place, put things into place. And so that this will continue to be the foundation of the country in the future. If we are going to grow our business and live happily together. Another thing for the gentleman from Bangladesh, you're saying about we are very into profit. I also have to say that a few years ago, Pricewaterhouse came to our company. They said they have given the best salary, best welfare in the country, but people still resign. So how to keep the people in Pricewaterhouse in Thailand? So therefore, money is not everything. Profit is not everything. Money cannot buy many things. Happiness of the soul is something that, even though a lot of you say this is kind of untouchable, but it is true. And I would like to stress again before we end, especially the young generation. Especially the young generation, don't think that they only care for games and music video and how to look nice and whatnot. I think 50% of their life, they are very lonely. They cannot find the real happiness. And this is something that I think nowadays many companies are looking into this, and that is why they have to do it. In order to keep the people. They cannot keep the people only by giving money. So donation is not the only thing. It's the giving and helping. And we believe that people will feel that they are valuable when they can give. And when the company can provide them the opportunity to give, and that will be the 100% satisfaction. Thank you.
Thank you for raising a very important issue. We'll just move on to the gentleman over there and then the lady in front, and we'll finish with that.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sorry. Yes, and one.
I'm from Awaz Center for Development Services, Pakistan. I'm representing Regional Civil Society Engagement Mechanism. Thanks for the nice presentations and discussions. But I'm a bit concerned to learn about some of the examples from the private sector on accountability mechanisms, because we are actually entering into the post-2015 development agendas. Should we have certain good practices that can be followed up in the development sector in future?
Thank you very much. Would you like to address that, ASHVIN?
I'm not sure I fully grasp the question. I mean, I look at from the private sector point of view, the accountability question to me does come back to the measurement question. There are other dimensions to it, but I'm particularly concerned with, as we blur potentially the lines between what is the role of the private sector, what is the role of philanthropy, what is the role of government, how do we also talk about the way in which that contribution is being measured? Because one of the concerns that we have is that if you're addressing a problem that relates to an SDG, for example, in the future, and it's being done in a highly dispersed way, how do you report on it? How do you measure it? How do you then actually have a dialogue with companies, in this case, in the private sector, on what that actually constitutes, what it adds up to? So I'm not sure I'm really answering your question, but I would just throw into the mix that I think we have a new, we have an opportunity as well as an imperative now to really come back to this question of measurement and aggregation. When governments measure their poverty rates or their human development index or something, there are some fairly clear metrics around that. And we don't as yet incorporate sufficiently the contribution, if you like, of, say, a public-private partnership in the same way. So I think there's an area for aligning a bit more. But I realize I'm not fully getting your question, I think.
That answers it adequately. I'd now like to, just before the question over there, I'd like to call on the distinguished delegate of Tuvalu, who I think you had something to say about the previous intervention. Please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Matia Toafa from Tuvalu. I thank the presenters, the key speakers, for the very elaborative, interesting presentations. I don't have a question, but I just want to comment on a few issues that had been raised. I can't agree more with ASHVIN. It is to government to take the lead in having the policy framework formulated. This is for inclusiveness of private sector or civil society as a partner for development. I think we all know that this inclusiveness have been formalized in the high-level meeting in Mexico earlier this year. And I can't agree more with Jandran, with the private sector, the companies. All the companies that are making money and enjoying life in this world are capitalism with capitalists. So we need to change that narrative and modify and revisit what is there. It has to be country by country case. We don't fit, in the sizes there. So Tuvalu is a very small place, and we have our own problems. We know there are small private sectors operating in Tuvalu, and they have their own problems. Government is trying to help them, give them the tools for them to survive. We also know we have civil societies, NGOs, like the Women Association, trying to help out. We also know that community workers, community activities, voluntarily are there. And I think this is the way forward for, I'm talking about Tuvalu, is to have a right mix of that policy framework. And the government has to take the lead in this. And I wonder if ESCAP and some of these top executive with the ideas to help us formulate this framework policy. It can be very painful, but we need to make this a change and work a way forward that is, suitable for each and every one of us. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Unless anyone has a point, we'll move to the final question before we have a little summary, and then thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for this opportunity. My name is Chai Yiping. I work with Development Alternatives with Women for New Era and also part of the Asian Pacific Civil Society Engagement Mechanism. I would like to particularly focusing on the issue of private sectors in the financing for development. financial flows to the developing country, mainly through the foreign direct investment, followed by the overseas development assistance, and the philanthropy. As public resources for development assistance are scarce, the private sector is increasingly looked as an important additional source of external finance and domestic resource mobilization. However, about 90% of jobs in developing countries are created by the private sectors, but only about 1/4 of this working age population in developing countries engaged in the productive and decent employment, where more than 9 million workers are living in households with income below the $2 a day poverty line. In particular, women and large cohorts of the young people are without decent job and living wage for them to live in dignity. In this regards, on the private sectors in financing for development, I would like to propose 2 policy recommendations. First, as mobilizing private sector funding for development are relatively new areas of development policy, it entails the need to critical review of existing policies and new instruments and programs, monitoring and evaluating its impact with the participation of civil societies and representation of the affected communities. For example, the policies that aimed at creating an enabling business and sound regulatory environment that is conducive to private investment, trade, and job creation. Does it work? How, why, and why not? And lastly, I would like to reiterate the points that raised by the panelists and distinguished delegates that developmental role of the state should be reinforced and public financing must be prioritized over the public-private partnerships, especially in relation to the provision of the basic public services like health, water, sanitation, education, and etc. Sustainable development involves the multiple actors and partners, as we discussed in these 2 days. There is a need for common performance standards, universal measurement techniques, and a global sharing platform and accountability mechanism that include finance, social and environmental well-being, and human rights that defined by the human rights treaties and instruments that globally recognized. Moreover, there is a need for trust and transparency between all partners, and all partners need to be held accountable for their results. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Andrew and then
I don't think there's an easy answer to that question, other than yes. But that's I feel yes, but I should say more than that. I think many of the aspects that you have touched on are regulatory and accountability mechanism stick rather than carrot enforcement to achieve, and I agree entirely with that. And I think in terms of the public-private partnerships and philanthropic money and so on, that can do something around the edge of promoting good practice and working with it, choosing partners carefully and having a framework for that also. But I think what I was going to say, and we've talked a lot about good business and bad business, and we've talked about good government and bad government. We've talked about good social sector and bad social sector, and I think that's important to recognise. And I think what we're talking about in public-private partnerships is finding those areas where there are good aspects within each of the 3 sectors, and picking those as leaders and role models and work from there out. I believe in asset-based approaches. I think that we can have 2 things. We can have the regulatory frameworks and the accountability frameworks coming from one direction, but I think there are examples and beacons of that can lead and that can form the basis for an upwards movement as well. So I think that would be my rambling answer to a very good question.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Chandran, very brief.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we again ask the questions. I've always been puzzled by the idea of FDI. I think we just need to have DI, take out the foreign, because this notion that somehow it'll always be foreign, essentially doesn't change the discussion and narrative about the enormous amount of wealth in this part of the region. But it also doesn't address the very uncomfortable question, why is it always investments in Asia based on the fickle nature of capital flows based on Western capital markets? So this is an issue that, living in Hong Kong, I'm very familiar with. So I think we should talk about direct investments. It starts with local. Forget this foreign stuff because it's fickle. As soon as there's a bit of crisis in the US, you know, the Ponzi scheme of the banks run out, we're all supposed to be worried because foreign direct investments will leave in droves. So we need to change that. And one of the suggestions I'm making, and I hope the ESCAP people will take this on board, is essentially the central banks in Asia need to stop thinking and imagining they are some kind of Fed in the US. The problem is most of our banking chiefs, etc., from India to Malaysia, etc., all went to Chicago school, etc., and they only learned one book. And therefore, they're all trying to be Fed people. And they should go back and listen to really their constitution, which says the central bank has a development imperative, rather than all the mumbo-jumbo about rates and interest rates, etc. That is important, but they have a development imperative. And that's the problem we have. Too many of our central banks are run by Chicago school types and Wharton Business School graduates. They should come back to this. And we should recognize that the development imperative that taught in the 60s, 70s, that somehow you'll have trickle-down economics, that is broken. We need to think about things very differently, and the flow of capital, which needs to be within the region and capitalizing on money, and not open to the sort of vagaries and fickleness of global capital flows, foreign, just direct investments.
Thanks very much, Chandran. We've coming close to time, so I'd just like to say we were going to have closing remarks, but I'll move straight, I think, to the closing messages, unless anyone has a really compelling. So I'd just like to say we have had many valuable ideas and suggestions and even valuable criticisms, Chandram, today, including broad agreement, I think, that government remains fundamental, but new dynamics and discussion between business, philanthropic foundations and multilateral organisations reminds us that we cannot rely on government alone. And it is increasingly a combination of these various sectors that will really carry us forward into the post-2015 scenario. Overall, taking into account the very excellent comments and questions from the floor, perhaps I could draw a few key messages I think we can take away from this. The first, that momentum is building for a new model of public-private sector engagement, which emphasises financial inclusion and higher social returns. So that means there is a real potential to better align business and development objectives to maximise development impact and support the post-2015 development agenda. Perhaps the second message could be that the engagement of the private sector or the growing engagement does create opportunities for innovative policies, practices and financing mechanisms for development that move beyond our reliance on official aid and older, let's say older or increasingly obsolete models of funding. But it is now time perhaps for government as well as philanthropic foundations and private sector to hold more dialogues like these, evolve and come up with policy frameworks, and also pay attention to reforming or innovating within the financial and regulatory architecture to make some of these ideas more possible and implementable. Finally, the continued multi-stakeholder public-private dialogue really can help evolve these models for concepts such as impact investing and possibly take these concepts, impact investing, for example, to the next level. We've had some calls today for a new narrative, redefining the narrative, or moving on and perhaps up a few levels. So they can also help better define areas of cooperation that could be critical to the post-2015 scenario, and truly in order to ensure the future we want. So I'd like to thank everybody and our panellists, and perhaps ask our MC to come up and do the same more eloquently.
Ladies and gentlemen, if we could give our distinguished panelists a round of applause for their interventions and thoughts. And thank you to our moderator and our engaging audience for your active participation in today's session. In concluding, ladies and gentlemen, as member states shape an inspiring post-2015 development agenda, it is imperative that all sectors of society be engaged in this process. And in this regard, the private sector is an increasingly essential partner. We look to them to help catalyze innovations and solutions to improve the lives of people in Asia and the Pacific. Before concluding, ladies and gentlemen, I have a few housekeeping announcements. All delegates and participants of the 70th ESCAP session are cordially invited to a special luncheon event hosted by the Executive Secretary. For today's panelists and moderator, we will also be hosting a separate luncheon for you. The high-level consultation on the G20 Brisbane Summit, Perspectives from Asia and the Pacific, will be held from 12 o'clock to 1:30 today at the reception hall on the ground floor of UNCC. Thank you for your attention. The meeting is adjourned.